Hi, everybody. My name is Ashley Lehman, and I am going to be talking to you about direct and explicit vocabulary instruction. So, what is it? Direct explicit vocabulary instruction. It is the act of giving students a select group of words that you as the teacher have selected as words that are important for them to know and understand. And it also kind of serves as almost like an umbrella term that represents both the intertwined teaching of words and those strategies, right? So teaching students, like giving students that exact word, but then also giving them strategies such as how do we break down this word by the root, or how do we use our context clues in order to make meaning of this word. So the direct and explicit vocabulary instruction is kind of that umbrella term that represents both of those things. So there are a couple different steps to direct and explicit vocabulary instruction. One of the first steps is to obviously, right, you want to select those words that students need to know. You have deemed them as important. And typically these words are not going to be, words that we use in everyday language or words that they encounter all the time. A lot of these words are going to be more domain specific words that they're going to find a lot in their textbooks or in articles that they need to read as some sort of supplemental work or something like that, right? They're academic words that aren't typically encountered. So examples of those words would be demonstrate, illustrate, investigate, ridiculous, enormous. So those are just examples of those words. After you have selected those words that you deem as important for students to understand, you want to develop a student-friendly definition. So a student-friendly definition is a definition that's easy for a student to understand. You're going to give them, this little grouping of words of easier to understand words. It's going to help that student be like, oh, well, I get what these words mean. Now I know what this really big, kind of scary, tough word means. So an example of that would be enormous, right? So a student-friendly definition of that is really big. So the next step to that would be providing multiple opportunities to interact with words in different contexts. So examples of that, you want to define vocabulary within the sentence. So say you read a sentence and that word is in there. You might define that vocabulary word for how it's used in that sentence, and then explain, okay, how does this word make sense in the context of the sentence, or maybe even, right, the context of the paragraph, or the context of what you're working on as a whole. And then you want to provide additional activities and additional examples of how that new word can be used. So example of that, the teacher reads, Maria saw an enormous elephant at the zoo. Enormous means really big. So essentially, right, Maria saw a really big elephant at the zoo. And then you want to continue to use that word in different ways and encourage students to use that word also. And then when the student does use that word, you want to reinforce them and be like, oh my gosh, wow, I see that you used that vocabulary word. Awesome job, right? You want to reinforce them using the vocabulary word. And then you want to promote deep understanding of the vocabulary. So you want to use activities that allow for students to continue to interact with that word in a way that they're kind of challenged, and they need to demonstrate that they really do understand the word. So that can be, using that word enormous and then saying, okay, what if these things are enormous, right? Is an oak tree enormous? Yes, right? Is a dandelion enormous? No. They can complete the sentence, right? I would like an enormous ice cream cone because more ice cream, right? It's really big ice cream cone. And then they might complete a word web. So words that are enormous. And then, changing it to describing something, things like that. So summary of findings, evidence. So a lot of people think that, a really great way to develop vocabulary is just, the more you read, the more words you're going to know, which is partially true. But actually there was a study done that said that students learn only about 15% of the new words that they encounter. So they might read this text and it has a lot of words in it, and they might really learn only a few of those words. But when explicit vocabulary instruction is embedded into the curriculum, their ability to acquire textbook type vocabulary is increased. So what that means is maybe in science. Okay, so in the science classroom, they are routinely seeing these words in the textbook that they're reading, but they might not be directly provided a user-friendly definition of it. So the chances that they're going to take some of those words that they learn in science and apply them to talking about what they're seeing in the real world is slim. So what you want to do is provide them with this list of really important words and help them get a definition of it. And then hopefully that will increase their ability to use the word. So some cautions and unanswered questions about this. One caution is that sometimes teachers might feel like they don't have time to develop vocabulary activities, right? Um, and so I just use a science example. I might use a social studies example. You might think, okay, I need to make sure that in my 7th grade classroom, I need to make sure that I can get far enough that I can cover the Civil War and be done with that by the end of the school year. Well, if I'm going to do that, I don't have time to spend, a half a class period or even one full class period a week talking about these vocabulary words that they need to understand. Maybe they're just going to understand them as we read. So a teacher might not feel like they have time to develop those vocabulary activities. And then another caution on that is that students may vary in their responses and approaches to vocabulary words. So I will use an example of this. I am currently a resource teacher in my building, and we were working on vocabulary, and some of my kids really find it beneficial for me to give them that user-friendly definition, and they'll get that user-friendly definition and be like, oh, okay, I understand. And then some students are like, nah, I still don't get what this word means. And so then we started playing a kind of charades game. And so, I would give the kids like this user-friendly definition, and then I would divide them up into teams and say, okay, we're going to play charades. Let's try and act out this vocabulary word. And then some kids, you could see it, they'd act it out one time and they would be like, oh, now I understand the word. So they're going to vary in the way that they approach new vocabulary and the way that they respond to learning a new vocabulary word. So, something that as an administrator you want to look for in terms of using this explicit vocabulary instruction in the classroom is you want to look for a varied approach to embedding that vocabulary instruction into the curriculum and into class time. So, an example of that would be, using a dictionary. That's kind of old school, right? But using that online or hard copy. So, I'm going to use science again, I guess. So, in the science classroom, right, you might encounter this word that kids are like, what does that even mean? So you can take some time, not a lot of time, but maybe a little bit of time and say, you know what, let's look up that word. And then let's kind of create this definition that is user-friendly and works for all of us. And so that's one way that you can do it. That is embedding that explicit instruction into what you're doing during class. And then another example would be providing students with the word and definition, and then asking them to create an image representation of the word. So you could do that before you go through your unit. You could do that in the middle maybe of the unit, right? Like here's our words, guys. Here are, excuse me, the user-friendly definitions that we've come up with as we've been working through this unit. Now let's draw image representations of the word. There is that interaction with the vocabulary word. And then you want to see that, teachers are giving opportunities to the students to use and interact with them. So what that can look like is maybe, seeing that the students are maybe in a call response, not call response, but maybe in discussion, the student is responding to the teacher's question using those vocabulary words that they have just learned, or talking to their peers in, a think, pair, share type activity. They're sharing what they're learning with their peers using those vocabulary words. And then you also want to look for, are students using strategies on their own to interact with unfamiliar words? Are students, encountering this unfamiliar word and then saying, oh, okay, well, I remember that this particular root means this, so, I can kind of make a guess about what this word means? Or are they saying, okay, well, I get what this sentence is saying, so I think that this is what this word means, right? I don't know the exact definition, but I can kind of gather that, this is what that word means. So are students using those strategies on their own? One really great activity that students can do to interact with words is called the Freyer model. And that is an excellent way for students to learn and interact with those new words. So I've included an image of it and what that looks like here on the left. I'm sure a lot of people are really familiar with it, but I think it's kind of old, but it is still. I find it so beneficial. I use it in my classroom, and I love it. But you put the word here in the middle, and then you put the definition in the left. You might put characteristics of that word on the right. Examples of the word in the bottom left, and then non-examples down here. So if we go back to that word enormous, right? I would put the word enormous in the middle, and then I don't know the dictionary definition off the top of my head, but I would put that dictionary definition here, and then a characteristic, I might put it's really big, extra large. Those are kind of those user-friendly definitions of something that's enormous. And then down here in the examples, I might put an oak tree. I might put an elephant, right? Those are examples of things that are enormous. And then those non-examples, an ant, I think that dandelion, or a an an a tick, right? Those are all examples of things that are not enormous. So that is an excellent thing that you can use in your classroom, and I will link that in the discussion, and you can try it out, and you can find a word that you don't know, and you can fill it out yourself. And then here I have a video. So 5 steps for the Freyer model. I found this excellent video, and it kind of talks about like, how do you fill this word out, this chart out. It's a little bit different than the example that I have, but it's kind of same concept.